Apple's foldable iPhone is supposed to be the moment that rewrites the smartphone playbook all over again. The kind of launch that reminds everyone why Apple waits, watches, and then shows up late to a category and still takes over. And that's exactly why the rumored name iPhone Ultra keeps popping up. Apple doesn't want this to feel like a fun experiment. It wants this to be a flagship statement. But according to the latest iPhone Ultra leaks, the road to Apple's first foldable iPhone is getting messier than a lot of people expected. And it's starting to hit the one thing Apple can't afford to lose, heading into a brand new product category: confidence. Let's start with the biggest dream Apple reportedly had for the foldable iPhone Ultra: no visible display crease. For years, that's been the holy grail of foldable phones. It's also the biggest complaint from people who refuse to switch to a foldable. The crease is there, it catches light, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The rumor is that Apple waited and waited, hoping the tech would get to a point where a creaseless foldable display was realistic at scale. And after all that patience, the disappointing part is this: Apple reportedly still had to compromise. The foldable iPhone Ultra is now said to have a crease that's decent, but definitely visible. That matters because Apple's entire pitch is usually about polish. Apple doesn't just want to compete with existing foldables, it wants to make them look unfinished by comparison. If the iPhone Ultra launches with a noticeable crease, the conversation instantly shifts from Apple perfected foldables to Apple has the same limitations everyone else has. And for a product that's almost guaranteed to be expensive, expectations won't be normal flagship expectations, they'll be ruthless. Now here's where it gets more concerning. Reports claim current foldable iPhone Ultra prototypes are creaking. Not a tiny sound if you press hard. We're talking about a hinge and chassis situation where the device can creak enough to raise alarms internally, to the point where Apple is reportedly considering delaying production again. And that's a wild place to be, because Apple is also rumored to be at a stage where it can't comfortably push this off forever. When a product gets far enough into development, supply chain alignment, engineering investment, long lead component work, delaying it isn't just wait another year. It becomes expensive, disruptive, and strategically risky. So the iPhone Ultra is caught in the worst possible middle ground. Too early to be perfect. Too late to easily postpone. That mix of compromise and uncertainty is exactly why excitement around the foldable iPhone Ultra seems to be splitting. And a recent poll makes that painfully clear. When people were asked whether their excitement for the iPhone Ultra was waning, the majority reaction wasn't even disappointment, it was indifference. A little over 56% of respondents said their excitement was never there to begin with. That's not "I'm worried," that's "I don't care." And for a first-generation product that's going to need momentum, indifference is more dangerous than hate. On the other side, about 24% of voters still believe Apple will ship an excellent foldable iPhone in the end, and that delays don't matter. That's the classic Apple faith. The idea that if Apple is taking longer, it's because they're doing it right, and when it finally launches, it'll be worth the wait. But then there's the group that feels like the warning lights are starting to stack up. Over 11% echoed the most obvious concern. If Apple already gave up on the creaseless display ambition, and now the hinge is allegedly rattling or creaking, are we sure the iPhone Ultra can actually be ready on time? And if these are the issues we're hearing about now, what else is hiding behind the curtain? Durability? Dust resistance? Long-term hinge wear? Inner display reliability? Battery size versus thickness? Thermal limits? The list of potential foldable problems is long, and Apple can't afford a public first impression that feels unfinished. Another nearly 9% said the reports are genuinely a little scary, even if they're not ready to write the phone off completely before launch. That's basically the "I want to be excited, but you're making it hard" crowd. And that crowd matters, because they're often the early adopters who create the buzz, people who would normally be lining up on day one if the story sounded more confident. The bigger theme behind all of this is that Apple may be entering a stretch where it's forced to ship products that don't fully match its original vision. And if you've been watching Apple closely over the last couple of years, that idea doesn't feel shocking anymore. There are already reports suggesting the iPhone 18 Pro might not get certain upgrades people expected, like a smaller dynamic island and under-display Face ID happening on the schedule originally rumored. That's important because Apple's recent iPhone evolution has felt more like a steady drip of refinements than the kind of leap that changes the entire vibe of the product. If Apple's internal plans were aiming for bigger changes but timelines are slipping, it feeds the narrative that Apple is playing defense instead of rewriting the rules, and it doesn't stop there. The same rumor stream suggests the next cycle after that won't be perfect either, claims that even the iPhone 20 Pro may have to be pushed out as another good enough step rather than the ideal execution Apple wanted, with the hope that the following generation aligns closer to the original grand plan. In other words, what was supposedly a smooth, multi-year iPhone strategy may be turning into a patchwork of compromises. That's not just a hardware story, it's also a trust story, because Apple's brand is built on the assumption that when Apple announces something, it's ready, or at least close enough to ready that the experience will still feel premium, and Apple's taken a few hits lately. The Apple Intelligence situation is a perfect example. Apple talked big, the hype cycle was enormous, and then the rollout and readiness didn't land the way people expected. When you combine that with other software stumbles, like the iPadOS 18 rollout that reportedly caused serious issues for some M4 iPad models, you start to understand why some customers are less willing to give Apple unlimited benefit of the doubt. It's not that Apple suddenly can't build great products. It's that the Apple never ships messy aura has been tested more than once. So when foldable iPhone Ultra leaks mention a visible crease and prototype hinge creaking, people aren't just judging this one product. They're judging it through the lens of recent history, delays, compromises, and launches that didn't feel as airtight as Apple's best eras. Now, none of this automatically means the iPhone Ultra will be bad. In fact, it could still end up being a very competitive foldable, especially if Apple nails the things that actually matter in daily use. Smooth inner display scrolling, zero weird app scaling, strong battery life, a hinge that feels premium, top-tier speakers, flagship cameras, and iOS features that actually make a foldable feel useful instead of gimmicky. Apple also has an advantage most foldable makers would kill for: deep control over silicon, software, and ecosystem. If Apple builds foldable-specific iOS experiences that feel natural, it could instantly make competitors feel clunky. But the bigger question isn't, can Apple make a good foldable? The bigger question is, will Apple's first foldable feel mature enough to justify the price and the hype? Because a first-generation foldable iPhone Ultra is almost certainly going to be expensive, and early adopters will be paying a premium not just in money, but in risk. And here's the honest take. If these leaks are even partially accurate, the smartest move for most people may be to wait. Not because Apple can't do it, but because foldables, by nature, get better after Generation 1. Hinge designs improve. Display layers improve. Creases get reduced. Durability gets tested in the real world. Repairs get clearer. Second-gen models usually fix the small annoyances that only show up once thousands of people start using the device daily.